everyone, and welcome back. High heels. Dangerous. Deadly. Illegal? No, that seems to be the prolific opinion that is so very loudly and relatively eloquently spoken in the 19th century as high heels revived and came back after a few decades of flat shoes. They were actually one of the most controversial fashions of the era and were usually listed alongside tight-lacing corsets as one of the most dangerous and potentially deadly or at least damaging to your health options when it came to fashion. They were blamed for everything from sore feet to tuberculosis and divorce. I actually spent a great deal of time researching this in the past as my thesis started with the controversy around high heels in the 19th century. But recently I started doing more research into the early 20th century and discovered, somewhat surprisingly to me, that the same things that they were saying about high heels in, say, the 1870s, they were still saying in the 1920s. Nothing had really changed, and in fact, it possibly got even worse. Now, it's important before we go any further to define high heel, because I know we've all visualized this. We are seeing the 6-inch stiletto platform style, just immensely uncomfortable looking shoe, but in reality, the documents of both the 19th and the 20th century usually listed as anything over 1 to 1.5 inches. That's right, this is the shoe that they're talking about, and this. That's really it. So keep that in mind as I go through the rest of this, that high heel isn't really, compared to what we're used to today, all that high. It's not all that extreme. And yes, I do know that properly high heels can actually be damaging. They can be harmful. They can cause foot issues, ankles, knees, muscles in your legs, tendons shortening, and it can even cause back problems. Yes, if you wear extremely high heels, if you wear poorly fit heels, if you wear heels a lot, all the time, walking on concrete, whatever it may be, if you were taking them to an extreme, they can be harmful on a logical level. What we are talking about here, though, is not going to be a logical level. Do they mention foot pain? Yes, but they don't really see that as the deciding factor in all of the things that are going to be taking place here. Because the high heel accidentally, seemingly chose to re-enter fashion at a very, very difficult time. This was an era where health, whether it was private or public, whether it was mental or physical or emotional or moral health, was of utmost concern in America, in the UK, and in Europe. There were so many articles and books and discussions about all of these different topics, how the health of one individual in any sense affected the entirety of society, and how important it was to help make sure that people were educated properly and were guided towards the correct decisions, and sometimes regulated into them as well. But when high heels first returned in 1851, they weren't the concern that they eventually became. The first references we can find to them coming back into fashion actually come from the Great Exhibition, which took place in London in 1851, and many, many new inventions and styles and concepts were presented there. It was a fairly influential event, and high heels were part of that. They were found on numerous different designer shoes, and there were a lot of ideas posited about whether that was going to be the extent of it. Was it going to make its way out into the rest of fashion and society? Were these high heels going to go from a reasonable level, continue to get higher and higher and higher and more and more and more concerning, to the point where we would need to do, potentially, something drastic about it? Because fashion traveled quickly in that era. It really did travel as fast as anything else could. As fast as a ship could make it across the ocean or a train could make it across a few hundred miles. Fashion was alongside with that. And mass production and industrial revolution practices made it so more and more people had access to fashion at an affordable level. And it meant that this appearance of super trendy styles in 1851 could very quickly make its way into the rest of society. I've talked about that before when I looked at some of my family photographs a few videos back and talked about how fashion managed to still work its way into rural Indiana in the late 19th century. I was very fortunate that that video is actually sponsored by MyHeritage, and again, MyHeritage has returned to sponsor this week's video as well. MyHeritage is the #1 family history and DNA testing service in Europe. And though I talked about making my family tree and looking at my family history with them a few months ago, this time I actually get to try out their DNA kit, which I am super excited about because not only have I never done this, I don't know if any of my family members have actually done it either, so this is a complete mystery to me. The process of these kits is super easy too. I got a box in the mail, just had to take a couple of quick cheek swabs and put everything back together, mail it off. They kept me updated on its process, and a few weeks later, just today, I got an email letting me know that my results are ready. In addition to the ethnicity estimate, which actually has a percentage breakdown of 42 supported ethnicities and 2,114 geographic regions included, it's also going to connect me to any possible new relatives that I don't know about. So let's take a look. All right, I am 39.9% North and West European. That is not shocking considering the German and French names I can add to that. 31.5% Balkan. That's interesting. I'm gonna have to look at that more. 21.4% English. And 7.2% Irish, Scottish, and Welsh. I'm more interested in the Balkan portion. I assume that means that some of my family moved from that region up to what was Prussia, probably in the 19th century. But I really wonder what area of the Balkans they came from. I don't know much about that area. Oh, that's gonna be so much fun to research. So if you're like me and you end up with tons of questions out of this rather than just answers, the DNA kits actually come with a 30-day free trial of their best subscription service. And after that, it's 50% off of a full subscription. So you can start digging into all of the records and hopefully find quite a few answers really quickly. So right now, order your DNA kit and get free shipping if you use the coupon below. And hopefully you'll end up with just as many questions as answers too, so you can do some research. Thanks again to MyHeritage for sponsoring this week's video. Now let's travel on back to the 1850s, where heels are starting to make their debut. And initially, there is a little concern that they might go to their extreme, but they have a potential purpose. They can actually be beneficial to health. By elevating the foot out of the water, out of the cold, it can help keep people healthier. Granted, this is an era where they do believe that having cold, wet feet could lead to not only colds, but to tuberculosis. So I do feel it necessary to note here that the claims you're going to hear, the medical claims in particular, throughout the rest of this video are not necessarily accurate, and I would generally assume they are all going to be inaccurate when it comes to comparing it to modern medicine and understanding of health. There's a lot of terminology that they use as well that's outdated and it means different things now than it did then, so I'm going to use the terminology that they did because we don't really have modern concepts that are comparable in a lot of cases to things like hysteria. So there's gonna be a lot of very outdated stuff here, and that's really what makes this all the much more absurd. Because as heels began to grow in the 1850s and really took off in the 1860s, the concern grew with it, and they knew quite rapidly that there was going to need to be something done about it. And the initial ideas seemed to be to just make fun of the people that were choosing to wear high heels, to point out how silly they looked. They ended up leaning forward in awkward positions, having to shift their body posture around, and that meant that they could only take short, stilted steps. They just walked very awkwardly. Do remember that high heels of any type hadn't been around for a good 50 years in the case of most people's experience, so we as a society kind of forgot how to wear them, how to walk in them, and how to do so in a elegant and safe way. This reached a peak in 1868 with what they called the Grecian Bend, where not only were women wearing very high heels, but they were also wearing a bustle. They had corsets that were fairly front forward, and they had large hair that sometimes was extending partially down their back in big braids. The entire look was very exaggerated, the posture was very exaggerated, and they made fun of it a lot. I actually have a wonderful little poetic satirical book that's about nothing but the Grecian bend. Granted, it does go beyond just making fun of them. They take it a step further and start to recognize the medical and social concerns with these sorts of fashionable garments. Because if there's a potential health risk involved, as well as vanity and looking silly, well, now we're starting to see an issue with women making this choice to wear something that is silly and vain and potentially dangerous. So let's take it a step further, they said. Let's prove a point and say, if you are so silly as to wear high heels, then why should we trust you to make your own decisions? If you cannot decide the simple concept of wearing healthy, safe, comfortable shoes, and you are the only ones that have the power to change fashion by doing so, why should we trust you to make decisions in voting or the government, holding office in positions of power or anything else? They quite literally wrote, as long as women continue to wear high heels, there is no validity to the suffragette movement. So they took it pretty far, pretty fast. And that's not something that is just held to the mid-19th century. In fact, as I stated, I started researching in the 1920s, that idea carried over, and they used it as a comparative to the dangers of alcohol. This is, of course, specific to America, where that's the era where we had prohibition and alcohol was banned, saying that both of them are bad habits. They are injurious, and those that follow through with the use of both don't have common sense. They don't have the intelligence to be able to manage themselves. So if you won't reform, we'll reform you, was one of the cries of the 1920s for both alcohol and high heels, apparently. But all of this was just the tip of the iceberg when it came to methods for scaring women away from high heels and for convincing them that they were a bad decision. Those that were writing prolific articles on the dangers of high heels, those that were supposedly doctors or just simply concerned citizens, were realizing they had to really drill in the idea that these were not healthy. And so they started to look for reasons beyond just simple foot discomfort and pain as to why high heels would be literally the downfall of society. The idea was that by shifting the weight forward onto the arch of the foot and moving the tilt of the body forward, that it would cause immense pain in the muscles, in the legs, in the feet, and that this pain would start to manifest itself in all sorts of other problems. This would lead to women basically having hysteria, but not actually, because if you just basically took them off the high heels, they'd turn back completely normal, they'd be perfectly fine. So dealing with this much pain and discomfort was literally just making women hysterical. They also talk about how much this curves the spine and causes the abdomen to protrude, the chest to fold back into itself. That reduced lung space they mention in the 19-teens and 20s is resulting in increased cases of tuberculosis because they're not breathing properly. The protuberance of the abdomen means that the pelvis is tilted incorrectly, and once we start to tilt the pelvis, all of your organs are just going to topple about into the incorrect position. One of my favorite references that I came across is from 1882, and it was a medical conference about the uterus. You can imagine how this is going to go. And Dr. Samuel C. Busey stood up and gave an entire presentation about high heels and the uterus and the potential danger. And he stated that, of course, because the pelvis is out of place, the torso is in the incorrect position, everything's just wrong, that the uterus, which we know is suspended by tiny elastic strings inside of the body and sways about gently as it needs to kind of breathe and have good circulation. It needs to move about just enough to have good circulation. If it moves about too much, obviously that's also a big problem. We don't want too much bouncy uterus. That'll be a problem. But we need a little bit of movement. But if the pelvis is in the wrong position, all of the other organs just kind of dogpile and topple on top of the uterus, holding it down into the incorrect position, not allowing it to move about as it needs to. And that can cause uterine displacement, which, yes, stepping in for a moment as a modern person is an actual medical thing that can happen. But usually, I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say it's not because of high heels or your pelvis being in slightly the wrong position. It's usually post-childbirth issues, especially, I don't know, if you live in an era where doctors aren't really the best at healthy methods of delivery, and, you know, maternal death rates are really high, and potentially, yeah, so I'm gonna hazard a guess it wasn't the high heels, but he claimed uterine displacement and, of course, inevitably, infertility were the final results of wearing high heels. The best part of this is not just the really descriptive and slightly absurd version of women's health that we are getting from Dr. Busey. It is also the fact that they have the records of what all of the other doctors who were present, who stood up to say something afterwards as a discussion, said. They have it all written down and quoted, and they all stand up and fervently agree. Yes, that is how the uterus works. Yes, that is how high heels work, and we need to let people know. We need to tell the public and inform them of this absolute emergency before horrible, terrible things happen. And they contemplate over and over again, how could women be doing this? Why would they wear such torturous devices? And in all of the same breath, Dr. Barker stands up and agrees thoroughly, also stating that he has noticed that the most graceful gait and movements which I have ever seen have been those who have worn high-heeled shoes. Talk about a mixed signal right there, but these doctors were obviously very, very concerned that high heels were going to cause gynecological issues in women. And that's where we move on to what really becomes the biggest argument in why high heels are a dangerous, dangerous device. It's not just women as individuals wearing high heels that is the potential danger here. It is a danger to society. They are damaging their bodies irrevocably. They are causing issues that cannot be undone. It's not just a little bit of foot pain. They knowingly, and this is very important here, knowingly are doing this permanent damage to themselves, which means that they are not taking into consideration how much of a damage this could possibly be on a larger scale. This is what makes it immoral to wear high heels. Because in the 19th, and honestly in the early 20th century as well, they have a big concern. And that is that maternal deaths are not looking so great in terms of rates, and birth rates are going down. Women are not having enough babies. Wait, let me rephrase that for you. White, middle-class women are not having enough babies. And this is something they very clearly state in the time period. And they take this problem and apply it to high heels. In case you're wondering, are these things really connected? Oh yes, they say that out loud very bluntly. In 1871, they say that high heels cause physical or moral injury of the race. In 1920 and in 1921, they really seem to love using the phrase race suicide, saying things like race suicide is distinctly aided by high heels. That because they believe that high heels cause potential health issues with reproduction, and that women's main purpose in this time, as they put it, their crowning triumph, is to take care of the household and to be a mother, to have children. That is the main purpose and goal, and they are damaging it through vanity, through something as silly as their shoes. And if women have had literally decades to figure this out, and though there were times where high heels went back down, and they always came back again, and women repeatedly went back to that fashion. And they've given them chance and time again to right their wrongs, to realize the damage they were doing, and to fix all of that by simply selecting different shoes. They didn't. So, something must be done. Something must be done on a much more serious level. And that is where we find ourselves in the late 19-teens. It starts in 1917, when we are introduced with the Kirby Bill in Illinois, which aims to make anything over a 1 3/8 inch heel illegal. Because according to Kirby himself, high heels are, quote, worse than U-boats. More deadly than a U-boat. Okay. And though it doesn't seem that this bill gets passed, they have a lot more going on at the time that they're a little bit concerned about. It comes back up again in 1920. At the end of 1920 into the beginning of 1921, a number of other states try to pass similar bills. On this list we have Washington, New York, Utah, and Massachusetts. Massachusetts is the first one. Their orthopedic society proposes a bill that will ban anything over 1.5 inches. There is a great debate over this. It is very well publicized. They bring in shoemakers on one side saying, if you don't allow us to make these shoes, we're going to go out of business. There's a huge shoe industry in that state at that time, so it would have actually been incredibly detrimental for them to not be able to produce things and, ship them to other states. There's also a lot of medical opinion on both sides, where they say, yes, it's going to be incredibly damaging to wear high heels, and others that say, no, this is really absurd. In fact, wearing a small heel is better than not for some people. So this is really subjective, and maybe we should back up a little bit here. In general, though, it seems that most of the articles say that it was laughed out of the government and no bill was passed. It does seem pretty absurd and nonsensical. How would they actually enforce this? Well, don't worry. Utah put far more details in about how they wanted to enforce this, which is that this was in early 1921, and by January 1st of 1925, the law would take effect, and no one would be allowed to wear them, own them, make them in the state of Utah. And their system for punishment on this was that the first offense would be anywhere from $25 to $500 fine. The repeating offenses after that could be anywhere from $500 to $1,000. And potentially all of this could carry a jail sentence of 30 days to 1 year. Can you actually imagine this? Going to jail for a year and being fined what would be an absurd amount of money at the time for wearing 2-inch heels. It's amazing. It's important to note that one of the things said in support of the Massachusetts bill, on record, was that high heels contributed to the increased maternal death rate and reduced birth rate. They specifically state that is something that they believe. Not everyone did, of course. By the 1920s, medical science was hopefully advanced enough that a lot of people realized that's not the case, but it was still being used to argue that point even only 100 years ago. And it's really interesting when you think about the fact that today we still wear high heels. It's still a regular part of fashion. In America, I have only come across one law that is standing that prohibits high heels, and that is in Carmel, California. And it's not because they're concerned that women are going to become infertile. It's because they're concerned that someone walking down the sidewalk will be unsteady, trip, fall, hurt themselves, and sue the city of Carmel or whatever it is. So they do actually offer permits. If you want to wear higher heels, you just essentially have to sign, if I hurt myself, it's on me. So they're not concerned about it for the same reasons. So there really aren't laws and regulations currently in place, meaning that you cannot, for your health or for the health of society, wear high heels. It's really terribly interesting though, because like I said, this is something that is listed alongside corsets and other items of fashion that today we look back on and think how extreme, how absurd. Those must have been damaging, those must have been painful. They're just so unusual to us that we feel like the claims that they made in the 19th century about the dangers of those things must actually be true, because why else would we stop wearing them? But we don't question that with high heels, because we still wear them. For the most part, most of us wear them sparingly, appropriately, within reason, and try to do so in a way that doesn't cause us pain, because no one really wants that. That's not fun. But it's so interesting because we don't have that same view of the dangers of high heels that they did in the past. We've moved past that. We have transitioned to high heels just simply being, yes, you can hurt your feet. Yes, you can hurt your back, but no, your organs are not going to dogpile onto your uterus just because you are wearing 2-inch heels. And the things that they claimed for these were just absolutely wonderful and absurd. I want to read some of these lists off to you because they really did blame just about anything they could on these types of fashion. Lists include sunken chest, protruding stomach, backache, stooped shoulders, serious displacements, and other confusions in the internal organs, among which are also diverse digestive impairments, bad breath, dead teeth, and asthma. Another states weakened arches, sprained ankles, corns, bunions, overlapping toes, poor circulation, lack of balance, prevent necessary exercise, cause bad disposition, unhappy families and divorces, insomnia, fatty degeneration, rheumatism, stomach trouble, and other internal ills. So, really, it could be anything at this point. It's like WebMD for the past, and the answer, instead of always being cancer, is high heels. It's today absolutely absurd to us, and it seems so silly, and we have to laugh at this. But the reality is, the concerns that they had at the time were symptomatic of a much bigger issue within that society, where they were really concerned with making sure that people made the appropriate choices for not just themselves, but for everyone else all of the time. And if you weren't good at making those choices, well, we're just gonna have to take that choice away from you. We're going to have to tell you, no, you can't wear high heels. No, you can't wear that corset. You can't wear that tight dress or that bustle or wear your hair that way because you are harming yourself. You are harming society. You are causing the downfall of everything. So yes, fashion and its relationship to health and women's experiences and politics and so much more is really important to recognize. They definitely didn't ignore it in the time, and we really can't ignore it today.